I feel like I feel like it's kind of a sad thing to transition to this other topic we wanted to talk about today, which is awful. Has to do with the mass shootings in the United States, which happen pretty much every 10 days now. Uh, but it's about the Nashville shooting that happened about 3 weeks ago. Um, Aiden Hale, a trans man who was a former student at this school, the Covenant School, went in and murdered three 9-year-old children, I believe, and then three school administrators and staff. And the reason why this has been on my mind a lot, and then backtracking into 2022 and 2021, kind of the climate in the United States, the political climate after the uprising of 2020, the incredibly disturbing reactionary backlash against transgender relatives in the US, obviously against like Black Lives Matter and Black relatives, and the gains I think that were made in LGBTQ2 rights, and then also for Indigenous people. I think in like Me Too and like women's rights, obviously the overturning of Roe v. Wade was a crushing blow, I think, to those advancements. But in the context of like the Nashville shooting, which brings us up for the most part to the present tense, something that I feel like maybe needs to be said. I felt like it was assumed because the Red Nation has always been very supportive of trans relatives, especially Indigenous trans relatives. Actually, people like Stella Martin and Maddie Jim, who are these like remarkable Dene trans women in the Southwest, completely transformed the landscape of LGBTQ2 organizing and politics in New Mexico, really bringing like Indigenous people to the forefront of those communities, and the articulation of those politics in that region. Real leaders, I would say, in the last decade to 15 years in that work. I consider them like almost like co-founders of the Red Nation because there was so much going on about a decade ago, and around about a lot of issues, border towns, but then also like Indigenous LGBTQ2 rights. And so it's always just been assumed, I guess, with like the queer, Indigenous, feminist politics of the Red Nation, that our trans relatives and just ride or die support, for LGBTQ2 folks, and particularly our trans relatives, Indigenous trans relatives, has always just been an unspoken, like non-negotiable, like ride or die part at the center, right, of the politics of the Red Nation. And I feel like maybe we've been silent, not on purpose, but just because this is so like ingrained in who we are politically and who we are as people as Indigenous people in the Red Nation, that we haven't really been vocal about it over the last couple of years. But I feel like because of what's happening to our trans relatives in Turtle Island right now with the backlash, that we should just like remind everyone and just like remind ourselves that, the Red Nation is here always as a space that will go hard to support our LGBTQ2 relatives now and forever. We really are ride or die. And I just remember like Red Millicody, who's we consider a Red Nation comrade, this brilliant Dene feminist, but Red Milla kind of instilled this philosophy that does not discriminate into the Red Nation's psyche, into our politics, and as like the form of kinship, or like how we treat each other as relatives for Diné people. And I just remember when she first said that, like how we see each other as relatives should always be non-discriminatory. It should be inclusive, and we should embrace everyone, because there's a great deal of homophobia and transphobia in the Navajo Nation. It's still enshrined in law through the 2005 Diné Marriage Act, which hopefully will be repealed this year. But anyway, I'm going on a long monologue about this. But the Nashville shooting really, I felt like we needed to say something in this moment and just like remind all of our LGBTQ2 relatives that we are still here, and we are, still a space that will go hard for these folks, especially because they've been really, I mean, dangerous, devastating attacks legally, physically, in the US. And the reason why I'm like contextualizing my comments about this particular mass shooting within this is because mass shootings are very political in the US. And whether they're like a neo-Nazi or like racially motivated, like the guy who went in and shot up the grocery store in Buffalo, New York last year, which was like in a largely Black community, to the person who went into the LGBTQ2 nightclub in Colorado Springs in November, just this past November, to shoot that up. But there's the culture wars that have been instigated largely by the right. I'm thinking about like media outlets like the Daily Wire, like the Ben Shapiro's of the world. The culture wars aren't just happening in the realm of discourse and like symbolic racism, right? They're not just happening in the realm of media. And I feel like the Nashville shooting, which happened just days after the Tennessee state legislature passed legislation, right, against gender affirming healthcare for minors or for children. I think they were also they banned drag shows as well, which is this thing that's now happening. There are a lot of conservative states that are really they're not even cracking down. They're just engaging in just like outright, blatant, just gives zero F's kind of homophobia and transphobia. The Daily Wire has been investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in quote unquote children's education or children's media. I've seen the right start to create this narrative of how gender affirming healthcare for children is a type of like child endangerment, right? And so they've spun this narrative that is influencing what's happening like legally, right, in the terms of policy, like what the state legislature in Tennessee was doing, and that this happened right before. And we need to understand, the Nashville shooting within the context of this really violent reactionary backlash against just the advancement of basic dignity and human rights for our LGBTQ2 relatives in Turtle Island. And that it is really important, I think, for organizations like the Red Nation to remind everyone, like vocally and very strongly, that we support our LGBTQ2 relatives, not as an excuse for like shooting up a school. That's not how I'm interested in this being read, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there is a political context, particularly with the hate mongering in these culture wars that the right has been fomenting, particularly in the aftermath of the 2020 uprising. And that Nashville shooting was like those chickens coming home to roost. It is not just something that's happening in the realm of discourse. I know I'm repeating myself, but it is truly like weaponized in the clearest sense of the word. Like there's nothing more weaponizing of discourse than a gun, right? Using a gun to like express a kind of politics that we have all been seeing play out nationally for 2 or 3 years, longer, but definitely it's escalated in the past 2 to 3 years. And so I don't know. I've been really all the mass shootings are so devastating, and who even knows how to metabolize those or like to think about what they mean anymore. It's really hard because it happens so frequently. But that particular mass shooting has really made me think a lot about the things that have been happening politically in the US and how scared, our trans relatives, especially young trans people, must be feeling, especially trans people of color. And I just remember where the movement was at like a decade ago and feeling like the wind was with us, the wind was at our back. And now it just feels like you're just getting shot from the front, and water protectors are getting domestic terrorism charges. You get what I'm saying? It's a really, really hard time to just be a person, an Indigenous person, a trans person, probably a Black person. But it's even harder, I think, to be doing the organizing work. And it's important for organizations like the Red Nation to just be strong and to be supportive in these particular moments. So I just wanted to say that.